The Aureus in the Ashes. Chapter 1. The rain in Rome had a particular smell. It wasn't the clean, earthy scent of a countryside storm, but a pervasive metallic tang that spoke of the city itself. Damp marble, wet wool, and the faint, coppery hint of blood from the slaughterhouses near the Tiber. It was the smell of a million lives pressed together, of ambition and decay. Lucius Varenus stood under the leaky awning of a wine shop on the Vicus Tuscus, watching the water sheet down the cobbles and turn the city's refuse into a brown flowing soup. He was a man of 40 years, with the build of a soldier who had traded his gladius for the stylus, but had not yet allowed his body to soften entirely. His tunic was plain, his cloak worn thin at the edges. In his hand, he clutched a small, heavy leather pouch. The contents of that pouch were the reason for the tightness in his jaw, the reason he was standing in the cold drizzle instead of in the warm, smoky interior of the shop. It contained 3 gold aurei, a fortune to most men. To Lucius, it was the last ember of a dying fire, the final payment for a life he had never wanted to sell. He was a delator, an informer. The term tasted like ash in his mouth. He had been many things: a soldier in the Legio Nine Hispana, a junior magistrate in the bustling port of Ostia, a husband, a father. Now he was a scavenger of secrets, a vulture feeding on the misfortunes of others for a percentage of their condemned property. He told himself it was merely a transaction, a service to the state and a means of survival in a city that devoured the honest and the poor. The state, in the person of the Emperor Domitian, was paranoid, and its paranoia created a market. Lucius had simply become a merchant in that market. But this was different. The man who had commissioned this particular task was not some petty official in the forum. It was Gaius Helvius Sabinus, a senator of old family and immense quiet power. Sabinus did not involve himself in the grubby business of denunciations for small gains. His interests were larger, his enemies more formidable, and the target he had named made Lucius's blood run cold. Marcus Aurelius Falco, the hero of the Chattian War, a man whose name was still spoken with reverence in the camps along the Rhine. "Find me something, Varenus," Sabinus had said, his voice a soft, sibilant whisper in the perfumed quiet of his study. The room had been a testament to wealth, lined with scrolls and lit by lamps of polished bronze. The emperor looks upon Falco's popularity with a concerned eye. A man so beloved by his troops is a man with options. We live in cautious times. Find me a thread, a loose word, a misplaced loyalty, a friendship with a known philosopher. Pull it, and you will be rewarded. Fail, and your license to operate within the city will be reconsidered. It had not been a request. It had been a choice between ruining a good man and being ruined himself. For 2 months, Lucius had stalked the shadow of Marcus Falco. He had bribed his household slaves, loitered near his baths, and followed his clients. He had found nothing. Falco was exactly what he seemed, a stern, honest soldier, devoted to the old gods and the traditions of the Republic, impatient with politics, and fiercely loyal to Rome, if not necessarily to the man who currently wore the purple. He was a relic of a sterner, simpler time, and in Domitian's Rome, that in itself was a kind of treason. Lucius had been ready to report his failure, to face Sabinus's displeasure when the thread finally appeared. It was not a philosopher or a seditious remark. It was a woman. Her name was Cassia. She was Falco's niece, the daughter of a sister who had married a Greek merchant from Corinth. She had come to Rome after her father's death, a ward in her uncle's house, and she was a Christian. The discovery had sent a jolt through Lucius, a mixture of triumph and profound disgust. Triumph because it was the perfect weapon. The Christians were a reviled, secretive sect, accused of atheism, incest, and cannibalism. Tolerated sporadically, persecuted fiercely. Association with them was a stain that could tarnish even the purest reputation. Disgust because he knew what would happen. Falco would not be implicated directly, of course. The charge would be negligence, a failure of patria potestas, the absolute power of the head of household. He had allowed the corruption to fester under his own roof. He would be stripped of his rank, his property confiscated. Cassia would face the fate of her kind. Lucius had presented his evidence to Sabinus, a testimony bought with silver from a terrified slave girl, about Cassia's secret meetings with others of her sect in the catacombs beyond the city walls. Sabinus had smiled, a thin, bloodless curve of the lips, and had given Lucius the pouch of gold. The state thanks you for your service, Vorenus. The state. Lucius looked down at the pouch. The coins felt like burning coals against his palm. This was the price of his comfort, the cost of his continued existence in this stinking, glorious city, the life of a brave old soldier and a foolish young woman. He made a decision. It was not born of heroism, but of a sudden, overwhelming nausea. He could not spend this money. He could not live in the house it would buy, drink the wine it would pour. He would return it. He would tell Sabinus he could not go through with it. He would find another way to survive. Pushing himself away from the wall, he turned into the rain and began the long walk up the Palatine Hill towards the house of Gaius Helvius Sabinus. He felt the weight of the goal with every step, a guilty, condemning heartbeat in his hand. Chapter 2. The house of Sabinus was not a home. It was a fortress of opulence. It stood behind a high, blank wall of fired brick, its only entrance a heavy, bronze-studded door guarded by two stone-faced slaves from Dacia, their muscles coiled like serpents. Lucius announced himself to the Ostarius, who looked him up and down with undisguised contempt before disappearing inside. Lucius waited in the vestibule, water pooling around his worn sandals on the intricate mosaic of Neptune, calming the waves. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and sandalwood. From deep within the house, he could hear the faint melodic plucking of a lyre. This was a world of softness and subtle power, a world away from the muddy, shouting chaos of the Subura where he lived. He was shown not to the study, but to the peristylium, the colonnaded garden at the heart of the house. Even in the rain, it was a vision of controlled beauty. Lemon and cypress trees stood in large terracotta pots, and a central fountain murmured softly, its sound a counterpoint to the drumming on the tiled roof. Sabinus was there, feeding scraps of meat to a pair of exotic birds with iridescent blue plumage. "Vorenus," Sabinus said without turning around, "you are wet, and you are early. The formal accusation against Falco is not to be presented until tomorrow morning." Lucius's throat was dry. "Dominus, I have come to discuss the matter." Sabinus turned slowly. He was a man in his late 50s, with a carefully barbered head and the calm, detached eyes of a predator that has never known hunger. He wiped his fingers on a small linen cloth offered by a slave. "Discuss? There is nothing to discuss. The evidence is sound. The wheels are in motion." "The girl," Lucius said, his voice tighter than he intended. "Cassia. She is young, impressionable. Falco. He is a good man, a loyal soldier." Sabinus's eyebrows rose a fraction. "A loyal soldier? His loyalty is to a ghost, Vorenus, to the memory of his brother in arms, our late Emperor Titus. My loyalty is to the present, to the man who holds the Imperium now. Falco's virtue is a challenge to a system that requires absolute submission. And the girl, her beliefs are a cancer. They deny our gods. They refuse to sacrifice to the Emperor's genius." They are a rot within the body of the state. Excising them is a public service. There must be another way, Lucius insisted, the words feeling foolish and weak even as he spoke them. A fine, a reprimand. Sabinus's gaze hardened. He took a step closer, and Lucius caught the faint scent of myrrh on his skin. You are having second thoughts, a dangerous luxury for a man in your position. You took the commission, you delivered the evidence, you accepted the payment. His eyes flicked to the pouch still clutched in Lucius's hand. Why is it you have not yet spent your fee? Do you find the currency tainted? Lucius's fingers tightened around the leather. I find the outcome disproportionate to the crime. The crime is not the girl's superstition, Sabinus said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. The crime is Falco's existence. He is a symbol, and symbols that are not controlled must be broken. You, Vorenus, are the hammer. Do not suddenly grow a conscience. It does not suit you. He turned back to his birds. The matter is closed. Be grateful for your gold. Many men would kill for such an opportunity. The dismissal was absolute. Lucius stood for a moment, the rain-soaked fool in the perfect garden. The tool that had suddenly developed a crack. He had been a fool to come. He had not changed anything. He had only marked himself as unreliable. He turned and walked out, the heavy door closing behind him with a final resonant thud that sounded like a tomb sealing shut. The rain had lessened to a fine mist. He stood on the pristine street, the 3 gold coins feeling heavier than ever. He could not return them. He could not spend them. He was trapped. As he began his descent from the Palatine, his mind raced. Sabinus had said the accusation was to be presented tomorrow morning. That meant the frumentarii, the secret police of the emperor, would move at dawn to secure Falco's house and arrest Cassia. He had until dawn. A reckless, mad thought began to form in his mind. What if he warned them? What if he went to Falco, told him everything, gave him a chance to get the girl out of the city? It was treason. If he were caught, his fate would be the arena or a cross. But the alternative, to do nothing, to let the machinery of the state grind 2 lives to dust for his profit, was suddenly unthinkable. He was not a good man. He knew that. He had done terrible things for money. But this was a line he found he could not cross. Perhaps it was the memory of his own daughter, dead of fever years ago. Perhaps it was the ghost of the soldier he had once been, a man who had fought beside men like Falco. Or perhaps it was simply that the weight of the 3 gold coins had finally become too great to bear. He made his decision. He would go to the house of Marcus Falco. Chapter 3, the house of Marcus Aurelius Falco was located on the quieter, more respectable slope of the Caelian Hill. It was a solid, unpretentious domus of the old style, built of tufa block rather than showy marble, its entrance flanked by 2 ancient laurel trees. There were no Dacian giants at the door, only a single elderly slave who looked at Lucius with rheumy, suspicious eyes. The Dominus sees no one at this hour, the slave croaked. It is a matter of the utmost urgency, Lucius said, his voice low and intense. A matter of life and death. Tell him Lucius Vorenus must speak with him. Tell him it concerns his niece, Cassia, and the Palatine. The use of the Palatine had the desired effect. The old slave's eyes widened slightly, and he shuffled away, leaving Lucius in the atrium. The room was sparsely decorated. A single impressive bust of a stern-faced ancestor stood in a niche, and a small, well-tended shrine to the household gods smoked with the last embers of the evening offering. It was the house of a man who valued duty over display. After a few moments, Marcus Falco himself appeared. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by decades of sun and wind. His hair was a close-cropped gray cap, and his eyes, the color of flint, assessed Lucius with a soldier's instant penetrating scrutiny. He wore a simple tunic, and despite his age, he moved with the coiled readiness of a man who could still command a legion. Lucius Vorenus, Falco said, his voice a gravelly baritone. I know of you, the informer. Why are you in my house? No pleasantries, no pretense. Lucius appreciated the directness, even as it shamed him. I have come to warn you, General, Lucius said, dispensing with titles. At dawn tomorrow, the Frumentarii will arrive here. They have evidence that your niece Cassia is a follower of the Christian sect. They will arrest her, and they will use her presence in your house to accuse you of negligence and disloyalty. The silence that followed was profound. Falco did not flinch, did not cry out. His flinty eyes remained locked on Lucius's, and for a long moment, Lucius felt as if he were being dissected. He saw the calculations happening behind those eyes, the assessment of the threat, the evaluation of the messenger, the formulation of a response. And you, Falco said finally, his tone dangerously calm, you are the source of this evidence. It was not a question. Lucius met his gaze, forcing himself not to look away. I was commissioned to find it by Gaius Helvius Sabinus. I delivered my report today. I was paid. He held up the leather pouch. This is the price of your ruin. I found I could not keep it. Falco's lip curled in a faint, cold smile. A repentant vulture. An interesting specimen. He took a step closer. Why? Why risk your own neck to warn me? Sabinus will not take kindly to your betrayal. I was a soldier once, Lucius said, the words torn from him. In the ninth, I fought for Rome. What I have become, what I do, it is a means of survival. But this, he gestured with the pouch, this is not survival. This is complicity in something foul. I may be a vulture, General, but I do not feast on eagles. Falco considered this. He glanced towards the hallway from which he had come, and his stern expression softened by a fraction. Cassia, he murmured, more to himself than to Lucius. The foolish, gentle child. He looked back at Lucius. She prays to a crucified God. She speaks of love and forgiveness. She gives her food to the beggars at the gate. I knew of her beliefs. I thought them a harmless folly, the fancy of a grieving girl. I did not realize my indulgence would be weaponized. Nothing is harmless in Rome anymore, Lucius said quietly. No, Falco agreed. He made a decision, his posture straightening, the commander re-emerging. Come with me. He led Lucius through the house to a small, windowless room that served as his study. It was lined with military maps, scrolls on tactics and engineering, and a stand holding his polished, well-worn legionary armor. This was the heart of the man. Sabinus moves quickly, Falco said, unrolling a map of Italy on a wooden table. The ports of Ostia and Puteoli will be watched. The main roads, the Via Appia, the Via Flaminia, will have checkpoints by morning. He traced a route with a calloused finger. But there are other paths, the mountains. She could go to Corfinium. I have a trusted friend there, a former centurion from my legion. He will shelter her. She must leave tonight, Lucius said. Now. Falco nodded. She will, but she cannot go alone. A young woman traveling the back roads would be prey for every bandit and corrupt official between here and the Apennines. He fixed his eyes on Lucius. You will take her. Lucius stared at him, stunned. Me? General, I am the last person. She will despise me, and I am known. Sabinus will have men looking for me by tomorrow. Precisely, Falco said. a grim light in his eyes. You are the author of this calamity. You will be its remedy. It is a matter of balance. And who better to evade the frumentary than a man who has made his living understanding their methods? You know how they think, where they look. You can get her through. And what will you do? Lucius asked. Falco's face became a mask of granite. I will be here when they come. I am a senator of Rome, a former consul, and a general of the legions. I will not flee from the jackals of the Palatine. Let them come. Let them make their accusations. I will face them in the Senate before the emperor himself. My life is here. My honor is here. But Cassia's life is not yet lived. You will save it for me. It was an order, not a request. Lucius saw the absolute resolve in the old soldier's face. He was sacrificing himself for his niece, turning his home into a fortress to draw the enemy's fire while the precious cargo escaped. Before Lucius could respond, the door to the study opened. A young woman stood there, her face pale in the lamplight. She was perhaps 19, with dark hair loosely bound and large, serious eyes that seemed to take up too much of her delicate face. She was simply dressed, but there was an air of quiet grace about her, a stillness that was unsettling in the frantic energy of the moment. Uncle, she said, her voice soft. I heard voices. Her eyes moved from Falco to Lucius, and they held no fear, only a deep, searching curiosity. Cassia, Falco said, his voice gentler than Lucius had thought possible. This is Lucius Vorenus. He brings grave news. You must leave Rome tonight. The authorities have learned of your faith. They are coming for you. Cassia's hand went to her throat, but she did not panic. She simply absorbed the blow. I see, she whispered. She looked at Lucius again. And you? Are you one of them? No, Lucius said, the word harsh in his throat. I am the one who told them. The silence in the room was absolute. Cassia looked at him, and he expected to see hatred, accusation. Instead, he saw a profound, unsettling sadness. It was worse than anger. You told them? She repeated softly. And now you are here to help me? He will take you to safety, Falco interjected firmly. To Manius in Corfinium. You must do exactly as he says, Cassia. No argument. Your life depends on it. Cassia looked from her uncle's stern face to Lucius's tormented one. She nodded slowly, a single, graceful dip of her head. As you wish, uncle. She stepped forward and embraced Falco tightly. May God protect you. The gods have ever been fickle, child, Falco murmured, holding her close for a moment before pushing her gently away. Now go. Gather only what you need. Food, a warm cloak. Nothing that identifies you. Be ready in the courtyard in a quarter of an hour. He turned to Lucius, his eyes hard and commanding. Vorenus, you have my niece's life in your hands. Do not fail. Lucius met his gaze and gave a short, sharp nod. The deal was struck. The informer had become the protector. The hunter had become the guide. And as he looked at the quiet, sorrowful face of the girl, whose destiny was now chained to his, he felt the full, terrifying weight of the 3 gold coins that had set them all on this path. The aureus in the ashes, the price of a life, and the beginning of a journey into fire. Chapter 4. The night was their ally, a cloak of damp wool and shifting shadows. Lucius led Cassia not through the main streets, but through a labyrinth of alleys, over crumbling walls, and through the reeking, narrow passages between the towering insula of the city. He moved with a practiced stealth, his senses heightened, every sound a potential threat. Cassia followed silently, a ghost in a dark palla, her small pack slung over her shoulder. She did not speak, did not question his route, her obedience absolute and unnerving. They reached the Servian wall near the Porta Capena, a lesser-used gate mostly frequented by farmers and carters bringing goods in before dawn. Lucius had bribed the watch here before, for other reasons, with other clients. He knew the sergeant of the guard, a grizzled ex-legionary named Stolo, whose loyalty was to silver, not to the emperor. He found Stolo huddled under a small awning, trying to light a pipe out of the rain. "Stolo," Lucius whispered from the shadows. The sergeant jumped, his hand going to his sword. "By Pluto's balls! Who's there?" "A friend with a heavy purse," Lucius said, stepping into the dim light of the guard's lantern. He held up a silver denarius. "My sister and I need to leave the city, quietly. Our father has gambling debts. Unpleasant men are looking for us." Stolo squinted, his eyes moving from Lucius to the cloaked figure of Cassia. He grunted. "Another one of your sisters, Vorenus? You have a large family." He took the coin, biting it briefly before pocketing it. "The debt collectors are getting uglier these days." "Go on then, be quick about it." He gestured to two of his men, who heaved open the small pastern gate set within the larger one. With a nod of thanks, Lucius took Cassia's arm and pulled her through into the darkness beyond the wall. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and cold. Before them stretched the Via Appia, a pale ribbon in the starlight, flanked by the solemn, silent tombs of the great families of Rome. It was a city of the dead, a fitting exit from the city of the living that had turned on them. "We cannot take the main road," Lucius said, his voice low. "We'll follow it for a mile, then cut north into the Albans Hills. We need to get off the plain before daylight." Cassia merely nodded. They began to walk, the only sounds the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel and the distant, lonely cry of a nightbird. The grandeur of the tombs with their statues and inscriptions was eerie in the darkness. Marble faces stared sightlessly as they passed. After a long while, Cassia spoke, her voice quiet but clear in the stillness. "Why are you doing this?" Lucius was taken aback by the directness of the question. He had expected it earlier. "I told your uncle, I could not live with what I had set in motion." "That is why you warned him," she said. "It does not explain why you are here, with me, risking your life. You could have delivered your warning and fled for your own safety." Lucius had no answer for her, or rather he had too many, all of them tangled and unsatisfactory. Guilt, a twisted sense of honor, the ghost of his daughter, the look in Falco's eyes. "Your uncle commanded it," he said finally, a weak defense. "My uncle has no power to command you," she replied. Not accusingly, but with a simple statement of fact. "You are not one of his soldiers. You are a free man. You made a choice." They walked in silence for another 100 paces. Lucius felt unnerved by her. She was not what he had expected. He had imagined a hysterical girl, weeping and fearful, or a fanatic spouting religious nonsense. This calm, perceptive quiet was far more disconcerting. "What will they do to him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lucius did not want to answer, but he owed her the truth. "They will try him before the Senate. Sabinus will have stacked the witnesses. The charge will be treason for harboring a subversive. The penalty will be death. Confiscation of all property. His name will be erased from the public records." He heard her sharp intake of breath, but she did not break down. "Because of me." "No," Lucius said, with more force than he intended. "Because of Sabinus. Because of the emperor's paranoia. You are merely the excuse. If it hadn't been you, it would have been something else. A rumor, a misinterpreted remark, a disgruntled client. The outcome was decided before I was ever hired. But I was the tool you found," she said. There was no arguing with that. They were both tools, he realized. He was the hammer, she was the chisel, and Falco was the block of marble being broken apart. As dawn began to bleed a pale gray light into the eastern sky, Lucius guided them off the Via Appia and onto a narrow dirt track that led up into the wooded hills. The air grew colder, smelling of pine and wet earth. They found a secluded grove sheltered by a rocky overhang, and Lucius declared they would rest for a few hours. He shared out some of the bread and cheese Falco's cook had hastily provided. Cassia ate sparingly, her movements economical and graceful. When she had finished, she sat with her back against the rock, her knees drawn up to her chest, and looked out at the waking world. "What is it like?" Lucius found himself asking. "Your faith." She turned her head towards him, her dark eyes luminous in the dim light. "Why do you want to know?" "I sold you for 3 gold coins, he said, the bitterness aimed at himself. "I suppose I want to know what I priced you at." She considered this for a moment. "We believe in one God," she began, her voice taking on a rhythmic, practiced quality, as if reciting a beloved story. "A God of love who created the world and everything in it, who so loved the world that he sent his only Son, Jesus the Christ, to live among us, to teach us and to die for our sins, to show us that death is not the end, and that love is stronger than hate." It sounded like foolishness to Lucius. The world he knew was ruled by capricious, powerful gods who demanded sacrifice and offered little in return. The idea of a single, loving God was as foreign as the idea of a gentle lion. You meet in secret. You refuse to sacrifice to the emperor. People say you practice dark rites. A faint smile touched her lips. They said the same of the followers of Bacchus. People fear what they do not understand. We meet to share a simple meal, to remember Christ's sacrifice, and to pray for each other. We refuse to call the emperor Lord because we have only one Lord. It is not sedition. It is fidelity. Fidelity gets you killed in Rome, Lucius muttered. So does faithlessness, it seems, she replied softly, her gaze drifting back to the valley below, where Rome was beginning to stir. You live in fear, do you not? Fear of Sabinus, fear of poverty, fear of the past. We are taught to fear nothing, for God holds us in his hand. A comforting story, Lucius said, unable to keep the cynicism from his voice. But it doesn't stop the swords. No, she agreed quietly. It does not stop the swords. But it changes what the swords can do. They can take my life, but they cannot have my soul. They cannot make me hate. That is a victory they cannot understand. Lucius fell silent. He looked at this young woman, facing the loss of everything, her home, her protector, her very life, and speaking of victory. He, a man who had faced Germanic warriors and shield walls, felt a tremor of fear at what lay ahead. She, who seemed so fragile, possessed a core of unshakable steel. He had been paid to destroy a weakness, and he had instead uncovered a strength that baffled him. The journey to Corfinium stretched before them, long and dangerous. And for the first time, Lucius Vorenus began to suspect that he was not the guide, but the one being led. Chapter 5. For 3 days they moved like ghosts through the landscape of Latium. Lucius was a skilled woodsman, a remnant of his military training, and he found them game, a rabbit, once a young boar, which he cooked over small, carefully concealed fires. He taught Cassia to move without leaving a trail, to drink from streams without muddying the water, to sleep in shifts. She learned quickly and without complaint. Her physical endurance surprised him. She was a city girl, raised in the relative comfort of a wealthy household, yet she kept pace with him over rough terrain, her feet, though blistered, never faltering. Her silence was not sullen, but observant. She watched the world with those large, calm eyes, taking in the flight of birds, the patterns of the clouds, the scent of the wind. It was on the evening of the third day, as they sheltered in the ruins of an old Etruscan watchtower, that the first real test came. They had just finished a meager supper of dried meat and hardtack when Lucius, standing watch at a crumbling window, saw movement in the valley below. He motioned for Cassia to be silent and handed her his pugio, the military dagger he always carried. Her eyes widened, but her grip on the hilt was firm. "Brigands," he whispered, his mouth close to her ear. "Or worse, frumentari posing as brigands. 4 of them. They're tracking us." He had been careless. He had grown complacent, lulled by the quiet of the hills and Cassia's serene presence. He had not covered their tracks well enough. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady. "We can't outrun them. They'll be here before full dark." His mind raced, assessing their position. The tower was defensible, but a siege would only end one way. They were outnumbered. "We have to ambush them, here, as they come up the path." He outlined a crude plan. He would wait behind the broken door. Cassia would be a lure standing in the center of the single room, visible from the entrance. When the men came for her, he would take them from behind. She listened, her face pale but determined. "You want me to be the bait. It's the only way. They will be focused on you. It gives me the advantage." She nodded. "I will do it." They took their positions. The last of the daylight faded, painting the ruins in shades of deep blue and purple. Lucius pressed himself against the cold, damp stone behind the door, his gladius in his hand. He could hear his own heart pounding, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. He had not been in a real fight in years. The thought of failure was a cold knot in his stomach. Failure meant his death, and for Cassia, a fate far worse. He heard them then, the crunch of gravel, the low murmur of voices. They were not trying to be quiet. They were confident. Saw their fire, a man and a woman, just as the description said. The woman's worth more alive. The man, the informer Varanus. Sabinus wants his head in a box. Lucius's blood ran cold. So it was the frumentari. They had been found. The first man stepped through the doorway, a hulking silhouette against the twilight sky. He saw Cassia standing alone and let out a coarse laugh. "There you are, little dove. No need to be afraid. We're just here to take you back to the city." A second man entered, then a third. They fanned out, surrounding her. Lucius counted. 3. Where was the fourth? He had no more time to think. As the leader reached for Cassia, Lucius moved. It was not a fight. It was a slaughter. The first man died before he even knew he was attacked. Lucius's gladius punching through the leather armor between his shoulder blades. The second man turned, his sword half drawn, and Lucius hacked into his neck with a brutal downward stroke. The third man fumbled for a horn to sound an alarm, and Lucius was on him, driving his shoulder into the man's chest and plunging his blade into his gut. It was over in seconds. The room stank of blood and voided bowels. Lucius stood panting, his sword dripping, his body thrumming with the old familiar adrenaline of combat. He looked at Cassia. She had not moved. She was staring at the dead men, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Then, a sound from outside, a twig snapping. The fourth man! Lucius spun around, but he was too late. The fourth frumentarius stood in the doorway, a drawn bow in his hands, the arrow aimed directly at Lucius's heart. "Drop the sword, traitor," the man snarled. Lucius knew he was dead. He could not close the distance in time. He tensed, waiting for the impact. A blur of motion. Cassia, moving with a speed he did not know she possessed, threw the Pugio. It was not a skilled throw. It was a desperate, wild fling. The hilt struck the bowman on the wrist, not hard enough to injure him, but enough to make him flinch and spoil his aim. The arrow released, whistling past Lucius's ear and shattering against the stone wall behind him. That was all the opening Lucius needed. He lunged forward, his gladius a silver arc in the darkness. The fourth man died with a look of surprise on his face. Silence descended once more, broken only by Lucius's ragged breathing. He turned to Cassia. She was trembling now, the shock of the violence finally overwhelming her calm. She sank to her knees, her shoulders shaking. Lucius went to her, his own hands trembling. He wanted to comfort her, but he was covered in blood, a killer standing in a charnel house of his own making. "Cassia," he said, his voice rough. She looked up at him, tears cutting clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. "You killed them," she whispered. "They would have killed us, or taken you back to be tortured and executed." He said it harshly, needing her to understand the necessity. "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know it was necessary, but the violence, the waste." She gestured weakly at the corpses. They were men with souls. "In this world, some souls are cheaper than others," Lucius said, the old cynicism returning as a defense against his own revulsion. He had forgotten what it was like, the intimate, messy business of killing. He had sent men to their deaths with a written report, clean and distant. This was different. He helped her to her feet. "We have to go. Now. There may be more." He quickly rifled through the dead men's packs, taking what little food and coin they had. He stripped one of his cloak, a plain, dark woolen one, and handed it to Cassia, replacing her finer, more identifiable one. They fled the tower, leaving the dead for the wolves and the weather. They walked through the night, driven by fear and necessity, not stopping until the first light of dawn found them miles away, exhausted and hollow-eyed. As they rested by a stream, washing the blood and the stink of death from their hands and faces, Cassie was silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "When I threw the dagger," she said, staring at her hands in the water, "I wanted to hurt him. I wanted him to die before he could kill you. I felt hate. For a moment, I felt pure hate." She looked at Lucius, her expression one of profound confusion and shame. "My teacher, Priscus, he said we must love our enemies, that we must turn the other cheek. I could not do it." Lucius looked at her, this girl wrestling with her soul amidst the brutal realities of survival. He, who had long ago stopped believing in souls, felt a strange, protective ache. "You saved my life," he said simply. "There is no shame in that. There is no philosophy in the moment between life and death. There is only action." "But what does the action cost the soul?" she asked, her eyes searching his for an answer he did not have. He had no answer. He only knew that the world was divided into those who were willing to kill and those who were not. And now, because of him, Cassia had been forced to cross that line. He had not only endangered her life, he had begun to corrode the very faith he had been paid to destroy. The irony was as bitter as gall. Chapter 6. The days blurred into a rhythm of relentless movement. The encounter with the frumentarii had shattered any illusion of safety. Lucius was more vigilant than ever, his senses constantly scanning for threats. He pushed them harder, taking more difficult routes through the rugged heart of the Apennines. The air grew thinner and colder. The lushness of Latium gave way to stark, beautiful peaks in deep, shadowed valleys. Cassia changed. The unshakable serenity she had possessed in the first days was gone, replaced by a quiet, pensive gravity. The violence in the tower had opened a crack in her worldview, and Lucius could see her struggling to reconcile it with her beliefs. She still prayed each morning and evening, her lips moving silently, but afterward she would often sit staring into the distance, a faint line of worry between her brows. They spoke more now, out of necessity, in the basic human need for contact. He told her fragments of his past, his time in the legions in Britannia, the damp cold and the screaming blue-painted tribesmen, the camaraderie of the marching camp. He spoke of his wife Livia, who had died in childbirth, and his daughter, who had lived only 6 years before a summer fever took her. "I had a small farm after my service," he said one evening, as they huddled under a lean-to against a driving rain. "I thought I could be content, but without them, the silence was worse than the noise of battle. The city, for all its filth and noise, was a distraction, a way to forget." "And being a delator," she asked softly, "did that help you forget?" He shook his head, staring into the small fire. "No. It made me remember that I was a hollow man, that the man who had loved and been loved was gone, and all that was left was a creature of appetite and fear." "You are not hollow," she said. Her certainty startled him. A hollow man would not have returned the gold. A hollow man would not be here, in the mountains, protecting me. "I am here because of guilt," he countered. "Guilt is a feeling. The hollow feel nothing." He had no response to that. Her logic was infuriating and undeniable. In turn, she told him of her life, of growing up in Corinth, a city of merchants and philosophers, of her father's death at sea and her mother's subsequent decline, of her journey to Rome, a stranger in her uncle's stern, masculine house. "My faith, it was a comfort," she explained. "In a world where everything was transient, home, family, security, it offered something permanent, an anchor. My uncle did not understand, but he tolerated it. He saw that it gave me peace." "And does it still?" Lucius asked. "Give you peace?" She was quiet for a long time. "It gives me purpose," she said finally. "But peace is harder to find now. I pray for those men in the tower. I pray for my uncle. I pray for you. But the peace, it comes and goes, like the sun behind the clouds." They were nearing Corfinium. Lucius could feel it in the changing landscape, in the names of the streams and villages. The tension began to coil in him again. Reaching Corfinium meant delivering her to safety. It meant the end of his obligation. It meant he would be alone again, with a price on his head and no purpose. One afternoon, they crested a high pass and saw a broad, fertile valley spread out below them. Nestled in its center, surrounded by walls, was a small city. Corfinium. "There," Lucius said, his voice flat. "We will be there by nightfall." Cassia looked at the city, then at him. There was no joy in her face, only a deep, unreadable sadness. "So soon," she murmured. They made the final descent in silence. The weight of the impending farewell lay heavy on both of them. Lucius focused on the practicalities. Find Manius, hand her over. Get a horse, disappear. Perhaps to Sicily or to the Greek islands. He had the 3 gold coins after all. They could buy a new life if he could ever bring himself to spend them. They entered the city just as the gates were closing for the night. It was a provincial town, quiet and orderly compared to the roaring chaos of Rome. Lucius asked directions to the house of Manius Bassus, the retired centurion, and was pointed to a sturdy farmhouse on the outskirts surrounded by vineyards. As they approached the door, Lucius felt a sudden, powerful reluctance. This was the end of the road, the end of Cassia. The thought was like a physical pain. He knocked. The door was opened by a stout, gray-haired woman with a kind, weathered face. "We are here to see Manius Bassus," Lucius said. "We are friends from Rome, from Marcus Falco." The woman's eyes widened. She ushered them inside quickly. The house was simple and clean, smelling of baking bread and wood smoke. A moment later, a man emerged from a back room. He was in his 60s, built like a barrel, with one ear mangled from some long-ago battle and the bearing of a man who had spent his life giving orders. "Who asked for Manius Bassus?" he said, his voice a low rumble. Lucius stepped forward. "I am Lucius Vorenus. This is Cassia, niece of Marcus Falco. He sent us to you for sanctuary." Manius's eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned them, taking in their travel-worn clothes, their tired faces. He looked at Cassia for a long moment, then back at Lucius. "Falco's niece," he said slowly. "He wrote to me of her. But he said nothing of you, Vorenus. The situation in Rome changed rapidly," Lucius said carefully. "The general was unable to send word. He is detained." Manius's expression darkened. He knew what that meant. He gestured for them to sit at a rough-hewn wooden table. His wife, whose name was Tullia, brought them wine and bread. "Tell me," Manius commanded. Lucius told him everything. The commission from Sabinus, his change of heart, the flight from Rome, the fight with the frumentarii. He left nothing out. As he spoke, Manius listened impassively, his eyes never leaving Lucius's face. When Lucius finished, the old centurion drained his cup of wine. "So," he said, placing the cup down with a definitive thud, "you are the informer who started this, and you have brought the poison to my door." Cassia spoke up, her voice firm. "He saved my life, centurion, more than once. He is a good man." Manius snorted. "There are no good men, girl. Only men who do good things and men who do bad things. This one has done both, it seems." He turned his gaze back to Lucius. "You have done your duty. You have delivered her. You may go." The dismissal was brutal and final. Lucius felt it like a blow. He looked at Cassia. Her eyes were pleading, but he did not know what she was pleading for. He stood up. His legs felt weak. "Yes," he said, "my task is complete." He reached into his tunic and pulled out the leather pouch. He placed it on the table in front of Cassia. "This is yours. It was the price of your freedom. Use it to build a new life." He turned and walked towards the door. Every step was an agony. "Lucius," Cassia said, her voice trembling. He stopped but did not turn around. "Where will you go?" "Away," he said. "There is nothing for me in Rome. There is nothing for me anywhere." He walked out into the cool night air, leaving the warmth and the light of the house behind. The door closed, and the sound was as final as it had been outside Sabinus's house. He was alone again. He had accomplished his mission. He had saved the girl. He should have felt vindicated, relieved. He felt only a vast, howling emptiness. He walked blindly through the dark streets of the town, not knowing or caring where he was going. He had reached the end of his purpose. He was a sword that had broken in its final use. He found himself at the town's forum, a small, dusty square dominated by a temple to Jupiter. He sat on the steps of the temple, looking up at the cold, indifferent stars. He had no plan, no future. The 3 gold coins were gone, and with them, the last physical reminder of his sin. But the sin itself was etched into his bones. He did not know how long he sat there. An hour? 2? The moon rose, bathing the square in a pale, ghostly light. Then he heard a soft footstep behind him. He turned. his hand going to the hilt of his gladius. It was Cassia. She stood there, her dark cloak wrapped around her, her face pale in the moonlight. In her hands, she held a leather pouch. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice rough with confusion. "You should be safe, with Manius." "I am not safe," she said, walking towards him. "And I do not think Manius's house is my destination." "What are you talking about?" "When you left," she said, stopping before him, "Manius told me his plan. He will send word to my uncle's allies in the Senate. He will try to use me as a symbol to rally opposition to Sabinus and Domitian. I am to be hidden away, a political asset, a pawn in a game I do not wish to play. He does not care about my faith. He cares only about my name." Lucius stared at her. "It is the only way to protect you." "Is it?" she asked, her eyes holding his. "Or is it just another cage? I left one prison in Rome. I will not enter another here." She held out the pouch. "You said this was the price of my freedom. My freedom to do what? To be controlled by another powerful man? To wait for news of my uncle's death? No." "Then what will you do?" Lucius asked, bewildered. "I will go east," she said, her voice filled with a new fierce determination. "To Ephesus or Antioch. There are communities of my people there. I can live and worship in peace, away from the politics of Rome. I can be free. It's a dangerous journey, impossible for a woman alone." "I will not be alone," she said, her gaze unwavering. "You will come with me." Lucius felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. "Cassia, my task is done. I have no reason." "You have no reason to stay," she interrupted. "You have no reason to go back. You said you were a hollow man. Then be hollow with me. Be my protector. Be my guide. Let this not be the end of your story. Let it be the beginning of ours." She offered him the pouch again. "This is not the price of my freedom. It is the price of our journey. Together." Lucius looked at her, at this young woman who had seen the worst of him and had not turned away, who had seen the violence he was capable of and had still thrown a dagger to save his life. She was offering him more than a journey. She was offering him redemption, a purpose, a chance to use his skills not for destruction, but for preservation. Not for the state, but for a person. He looked at the pouch, then back at her face, illuminated by the moon in a faith that was stronger than fear, stronger than hate, stronger than Rome itself. Slowly he reached out, but he did not take the pouch. He closed his hand around hers, the leather of the pouch pressed between their palms. "Keep it," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. "You may need to buy supplies." A slow, radiant smile spread across Cassia's face, the first true, unshadowed smile he had ever seen from her. It transformed her, lighting her from within. "Then you will come?" she whispered. He looked towards the east, towards the unknown, towards a future that was no longer empty. He looked back at her and nodded. "I will come." And as they stood there, hand in hand on the steps of the temple, the cold stars witnessing their pact, Lucius Vorenus felt the ashes of his old life stir, and from them something new and fragile began to grow. The informer was dead. The protector was born. The journey was not over. It had just begun. Chapter 7. The Road to Brundisium. The decision was made in the moon-drenched silence of Corfinium's forum, a pact sealed not with a signature, but with a shared look in the weight of a leather pouch. They could not stay. Manius's house, for all its rustic safety, was a political trap, and the long arm of Sabinus would eventually feel its way into every corner of Italy. The East was their only hope. They left before the first cockcrow, two shadows flitting through the slumbering town. Lucius used a single silver coin from their dwindling supply to procure two sturdy, unremarkable horses from a wide-awake and unquestioning carter who knew the value of silence. They were not magnificent beasts, but they were strong and sure-footed, capable of eating up the miles that lay between them and the port of Brundisium. The journey south was a lesson in a different kind of tension. No longer were they fleeing blindly into the wilderness. They were now navigating the populated, policed heart of Roman Italy. They avoided the majestic Via Appia, its stone surface humming with official traffic, legionary couriers, tax collectors, and the ornate litters of wealthy merchants. Instead, they stuck to the lesser Via Rustica, the dirt roads that connected farms and villages of travelers, a perhaps overly serious husband and his quiet wife. Lucius found himself falling into the role with an ease that surprised him. He would barter for food at market stalls, his tone firm but fair. He would exchange nods with other travelers, his eyes constantly moving, assessing, categorizing. The soldier and the informer had merged into a single, hyper-vigilant entity, a man whose primary purpose was the protection of the woman riding beside him. Cassia, too, had changed. The shock of the violence in the watchtower had receded, replaced by a resolute calm. She had shed the last vestiges of the senator's sheltered niece. She learned to care for the horses, to gauge the weather by the smell of the wind, to cook their meager campfire meals without complaint. Her prayers continued, but they were now quieter, more internal, a personal conversation with her God that required no external show. Sometimes Lucius would catch her watching him, not with the pity or fear he might have expected, but with a thoughtful, searching expression that made his heart beat a little faster. One evening, camped in a grove of olive trees overlooking a wide, fertile plain, she broke a long silence. "What will you do," she asked, "when we reach Ephesus, when I am safe?" The question had haunted Lucius for days. He had been so focused on the how, the route, the supplies, the evasion, that he had deliberately avoided the after. "I don't know," he admitted, poking their small fire with a stick. "Fine work, I suppose. My Latin and Greek are good, perhaps as a scribe or a guard for a merchant. My skills are varied." "You could stay," she said, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the flames. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Stay?" "With me," she clarified, her courage not faltering. "The community in Ephesus, they will be my family, but they are not you. I owe you my life, Lucius. But more than that, I have come to value your presence." It was a carefully chosen word, but the meaning behind it was as clear as the stars beginning to pepper the twilight sky. The space between them crackled with an unspoken tension that had nothing to do with the fear of pursuit. "I am not a good man, Cassia," he said, the old refrain feeling hollow even to his own ears. "The things I've done." "The man who did those things is gone," she interrupted gently. "He died on the road from Rome. The man sitting with me now is different. I have watched him be born." Her faith in him was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. It felt like a weight in a wingsuit all at once. He wanted to be the man she saw when she looked at him. He wanted to deserve the quiet trust in her eyes. "We should reach Brundisium in 2 days," he said, deflecting the conversation back to the safety of logistics. "The trick will be finding a shipmaster willing to take passengers without too many questions." She accepted the change of subject with a small, understanding nod. "We have the gold. Gold asks very few questions." He smiled grimly. "That it does." 2 days later, the air changed. The dry, earthy scent of the Italian countryside began to mix with a new briny tang. The cry of gulls joined the songs of the larks, And then, from the top of a low hill, they saw it. The great port of Brundisium, its famous double harbor, bristling with the mass of 100 ships, a gateway to the world. It was a chaotic, thrilling, and dangerous sight. Here, the authority of Rome was palpable in the form of port officials, customs agents, and patrols of legionaries. Their disguises would be tested here as never before. They stabled their horses at a rundown inn on the outskirts, paying for a week's board to avoid suspicion. Then, blending into the flow of humanity, they entered the city. The wharves were a cacophony of languages: Latin, Greek, Aramaic, Egyptian. Sailors shouted, stevedores strained under heavy loads, and merchants haggled over cargoes of grain, wine, and silk. Lucius led Cassia through the chaos, his eyes scanning the ships, reading their lines, their flags, the look of their crews. He was looking for a specific type of vessel, not a sleek imperial messenger ship, nor a lavish passenger galley, but a sturdy, broad-beam merchantman, the kind owned by a pragmatic captain more interested in profit than politics. He found her on the third pier, the Selene, a Greek ship out of Corinth being loaded with amphorae of olive oil and sacks of wool. Her captain, a thick-set man with a salt and pepper beard and a face weathered by 1,000 voyages, was barking orders at his crew. His name, Lucius learned from a nearby dock worker, was Demetrius. Lucius approached him as the crew took a break. "Captain Demetrius?" The man turned, his dark eyes shrewd and assessing. "Aye, and you are?" "A traveler, seeking passage for myself and my wife to Ephesus." Lucius kept his tone respectful but confident. Demetrius snorted. "I'm a cargo ship, not a pleasure barge. I don't take passengers." "We would not require much," Lucius pressed. "A corner of the hold is fine. We can pay." He subtly opened his hand, revealing a single gold aureus nestled in his palm. The captain's eyes flickered to the coin, then back to Lucius's face. The amount was far more than the fare for a luxurious passage. He understood the unspoken message. The price included silence. "Trouble?" Demetrius asked bluntly. "Family disputes," Lucius replied, layering his voice with a world of weary meaning. "A powerful uncle in Rome disapproves of our marriage. We seek to start anew in the East, away from his influence." It was a story as old as commerce itself, and Demetrius, a man of the world, had heard it all before. He looked past Lucius at Cassia, who stood a few paces back, her head modestly bowed, the very picture of a devoted, eloping wife. Her demeanor seemed to decide him. "We sail with the evening tide," the captain said, his hands snaking out to pluck the gold coin from Lucius's palm with practiced speed. "Be here 2 hours before sunset. You'll find space near the aft cargo. Don't get in the way of my crew. You cause trouble. You pay the sea to take you back." "Understood?" "Understood," Lucius said, a wave of relief so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. "Thank you, Captain." As they walked away from the pier, Lucius felt a hand slip into his. He looked down in surprise to see Cassia's fingers interlaced with his. She didn't look at him, but kept her eyes forward, a faint blush on her cheeks. He tightened his grip, his rough, calloused hand enveloping her smaller and softer one. It felt like an anchor in the swirling chaos of the port, a silent promise of the new life that lay just across the sea. Chapter 8. The Wine-Dark Sea. The Selene creaked and groaned like a living thing as it cut through the waves of the Adriatic. For Lucius, who had spent his military career on solid ground, the constant, unpredictable motion was a profound discomfort. For Cassia, raised in the port city of Corinth, it seemed as natural as breathing. They had been given a small, cramped space separated from the main cargo by a stack of wool sacks. It was dark, smelled of tar, salt, and sheep, but it was theirs. For the first few days, Lucius battled a stubborn nausea, while Cassia tended to him with a quiet efficiency that was both humbling and endearing. The sea does not care for the pride of soldiers, she murmured one afternoon, handing him a piece of dry bread and a cup of watered wine, the standard remedies for seasickness. It feels like the world is trying to shake me off, he grumbled, but accepted the offerings gratefully. As his sea legs slowly established themselves, a new routine began. During the day, they would sit on deck, out of the way of the busy crew, watching the endless expanse of water. The sheer scale of it was daunting. It made Rome, with all its power and paranoia, feel small and distant. Here, the only laws were those of wind, wave, and the captain's word. They talked for hours. Lucius found himself telling her stories he had buried for years. The terror and exhilaration of his first battle, the stupid jokes shared with his tent mates, the profound silence of a British forest. In return, she spoke of her faith not as doctrine, but as a lived experience. She told him of the teacher Priscus, a Greek slave who had introduced her to the teachings of Christ, of the simple, powerful love she felt during their secret gatherings, of the hope that defied the fear of the world. He said, "We are all sinners, fallen short of God's glory," she explained one evening as the sun set, painting the sea in hues of fire and gold. "But through grace we are saved, not by our own works, but by faith. It is a gift." A gift, Lucius repeated, mulling over the concept. The world he knew operated on a strict economy of transaction: sacrifice for favor, service for reward, betrayal for gold. The idea of an unearned gift was alien. And what must one do to receive this gift? Believe, she said simply, and repent. Repent. The word struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was what he had been doing since the moment he walked away from Sabinus's house, wasn't it? Not in a religious sense, but in the very marrow of his being. He was trying to turn away from the man he had been. One night, a week into their voyage, a storm hit. It came upon them with terrifying speed, transforming the calm sea into a churning, black chaos. The wind howled like a fury, tearing at the sails and rigging. Icy rain lashed the deck, and waves the size of houses slammed into the ship, sending shuddering impacts through the timbers. Lucius and Cassia were thrown about their tiny space like dice in a cup. The world was a roaring, tilting madness. He held on to her, bracing them both against the wool sacks as seawater poured in from above, soaking them to the bone. "We're going to sink!" Cassia cried out, her voice thin against the storm's roar. "Hold on," Lucius shouted back, his arms a vice around her. He could hear the shouts of the crew, the cracking of wood, the desperate commands of Captain Demetrius. This was a battle he could not fight with a gladius. He was utterly powerless. He saw the fear in Cassia's eyes, but then he saw her lips move. She wasn't screaming, she was praying. Her eyes closed, and a strange peace seemed to settle over her features, a calm at the very center of the hurricane. In that moment, facing what felt like certain death, her faith was not a theory, it was a rock. Lucius held on to her, and in the roaring darkness, he found himself making a silent, desperate plea to any god who might be listening, to Cassia's god, to the spirit of the sea itself. Not her. Take me if you must, but let her live. It felt like an eternity, but eventually the storm began to abate. The wind lessened, the waves grew less violent, and the ship, though battered, remained afloat. As the first gray light of dawn touched the bruised sky, Lucius and Cassia, exhausted and shivering, clung to each other in the wreckage of their corner, surrounded by soaked wool. He looked down at her, her face pale and streaked with salt water, and he felt something break open inside him, a dam of emotion he had kept fortified for years. It was more than protectiveness, more than guilt, more than a sense of duty. It was a profound, terrifying, and exhilarating love. "Cassia," he whispered, his voice raw. She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the dim light. She saw the unguarded truth in his face, and her own expression softened. She reached up a cold hand and touched his cheek. "I know," she said softly. No other words were needed. In the aftermath of the storm, amidst the wreckage and the slow return of calm, they found each other. The space between them closed, and he kissed her. A salty, desperate, and hopeful kiss that tasted of the sea and of redemption. The informer and the senator's niece were gone. There was only Lucius and Cassia, survivors, bound together not by circumstance, but by choice. Chapter 9. The City of Artemis. Ephesus rose from the coast of Ionia like a dream of marble and light. As the Selene limped into its magnificent harbor, Lucius and Cassia stood at the rail, hand in hand, watching a city that was both ancient and vibrantly alive. Great temples and libraries climbed the hillsides, and the wide colonnaded streets teemed with a diversity of people that made Rome seem provincial. Here, Greek elegance met Eastern opulence under the benevolent gaze of the Roman peace. The air was thick with the smells of spices, incense, and the sea. After the relative isolation of their journey, the sensory overload was intense. Captain Demetrius gruffly wished them luck as they disembarked, his ship needing extensive repairs. They were on their own once more, but the fear that had haunted them in Italy felt diluted by the bright foreign sun. Their first task was to find the Christian community. Cassia had the name Priscus had given her long ago. Ask for Lydia, the seller of purple, near the Magnesian Gate. It took them most of the day to navigate the vast city. The Temple of Artemis, one of the seven wonders, dominated the skyline, a staggering monument to a different kind of faith. Finally, near the city's eastern gate, they found a small, respectable shop selling expensive purple-dyed cloth. A woman in her 40s with a sharp, intelligent face and hands stained with dye was overseeing her workers. "Are you Lydia?" Cassia asked in Greek, her voice tentative. The woman turned, her eyes narrowing in assessment. "I am. And you are?" "My name is Cassia. I was sent from Rome by a teacher named Priscus. He said you could help me." The name Priscus acted like a password. Lydia's guarded expression melted into one of warm recognition. "Priscus, is he well?" Then her eyes flicked to Lucius, standing protectively behind Cassia, his posture and scars marking him as a man of violence. "And this is?" "This is Lucius," Cassia said, her voice firm. "My husband, my protector. We have come a long way to find sanctuary." Lydia's gaze softened as she took in Cassia's earnest face and Lucius's unwavering stance. She saw the dust of the road on them, the weariness in their eyes, and the unshakable bond between them. "Sanctuary you shall have," she said. "Come, you must be tired and hungry." Lydia's house was a spacious building attached to her workshop. She was a woman of means, a benefactor to the small, clandestine church in Ephesus. That evening, they shared a simple meal with her and a few other believers, a tent maker named Paulus and his family, and an elderly Greek philosopher turned Christian named Linus. The conversation was warm, the fellowship genuine. They listened with horror and sympathy to Cassia's tale of flight from Rome, though she carefully omitted Lucius's original profession, referring to him only as a loyal friend of her uncle. They were welcomed without question, their story of persecution a badge of honor in this community. Lucius watched it all, a silent observer. He was grateful for the safety, for the food, for the kindness shown to Cassia, but he felt like a wolf who had wandered into a flock of sheep. Their talk of love, forgiveness, and a coming kingdom felt alien. He was a man of this world, of flesh and blood, and the sharp, cold reality of the sword. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. Cassia thrived. She joined the women in their prayers and charitable work, her gentle nature and education making her a quick and valued member of the group. She had found her anchor. Lucius, however, grew restless. Lydia had offered him work in her warehouse, a safe and simple job, but the monotony chafed at him. He was not made for counting bolts of cloth and managing inventory. The peace felt like a cage. The memory of the storm, of the fight in the watchtower, of the raw struggle for survival, had awakened something in him that could not be satisfied by the quiet rhythms of a merchant's life. He began taking long walks through the city, through the bustling marketplaces and down to the docks, where the air smelled of adventure and the languages of a dozen different lands filled his ears. He saw traders from Palmyra with their camels, sailors from Alexandria with tales of the Nile, and mercenaries from Germania looking for work. This was a borderland between worlds, and the part of him that was a soldier and a survivor itched to be a part of it. One evening, he found Cassia in the small garden of Lydia's house. She was tending to the herbs, her movements peaceful and content. "I've found work," he said without preamble. She looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, with Lydia?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "With a man named Alexandros. He runs a security detail for caravans heading into the interior, to Phrygia and Galatia. He needs men who can handle themselves. The pay is good." A shadow of fear crossed Cassia's face. "Caravan guards? Lucius, that's dangerous. There are bandits in the hills." "I know," he said. "It's what I'm good at, Cassia. Sitting here in this house, I feel like I'm rusting away. I need to be useful. I need to provide for us, for our future." He reached out and took her hand. "This is how I can do that. Not as a scribe, but as what I am." She searched his eyes, seeing the truth in them. She understood that the peace she craved was, for him, a form of death. She loved the man he was, not a ghost of a man he might pretend to be. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, her voice small. "A month, perhaps 2. I'll be back before the first rains." She was silent for a long moment, then squeezed his hand. "Then you must go. I will pray for your safety every day." He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly. He was not leaving her. He was building a foundation for them. In the wild hills of Anatolia, with a sword in his hand and a purpose, he could finally lay the ghost of Lucius the informer to rest and become Lucius the provider, the man worthy of her love. Chapter 10. The Shadow of the Eagle. The caravan route was a dusty, sun-baked ribbon winding through rugged, beautiful country. Lucius fell back into the old military routines with an ease that was both comforting and disconcerting. He was good at this, setting watches, reading the terrain for ambush sites, projecting an aura of calm competence that inspired confidence in the other guards and the nervous merchants. His commander, Alexandros, a grizzled Macedonian with a network of scars and a dry wit, quickly recognized his skill. "You were legionary, yes?" he grunted one evening as they shared a skin of wine. "Ninth Hispana," Lucius confirmed. Alexandros nodded. "Good legion. Bad luck in Britannia, I heard. You have the look of a man who has seen bad luck and walked away from it." Lucius just grunted in return, and Alexandros, respecting his silence, asked no more. The work was hard but straightforward. They fought off one half-hearted bandit attack, a disorganized rabble that scattered at the first sight of a disciplined shield wall. For Lucius, it was a cathartic release of the tension that had been building in Ephesus. This was a clean danger, a threat he could see and meet head on. They reached the bustling city of Ancyra in Galatia, delivered their cargo, and after a week of rest and resupply, began the return journey. It was on the third day of the return trip that the shadow fell. A small group of riders approached from the west, moving with the purpose of official couriers. As they drew nearer, Lucius's blood ran cold. They were not local auxiliaries. They wore the distinctive, practical gear of the frumentarii. One of them, a man with a lean, hawk-like face and a cruel twist to his mouth, seemed to be in charge. His eyes scanned the caravan guards with detached professionalism, and for a fleeting second, they locked with Lucius's. There was no sign of recognition, just the flat, assessing gaze of a predator scanning a herd. The riders passed without stopping, kicking up dust as they continued east, presumably on official business to the legionary headquarters in Ancyra. But the damage was done. The sight of them was a bucket of ice water. The peace of Ephesus, the joy of his new life with Cassia, it all felt like a fragile illusion that had just been cracked. Sabinus had not forgotten. The empire's memory was long, and its reach was longer. He said nothing to Alexandros or the others, but his vigilance, already sharp, became a razor's edge. Every stranger on the road was a potential threat, every dust cloud a possible sign of pursuit. The ghost of Rome had found him even here, in the vastness of Anatolia. When the caravan finally wound its way back into Ephesus 2 months later, Lucius's pay purse was heavy with silver, but his heart was heavy with dread. He went straight to Lydia's house. Cassia was in the garden, and when she saw him, her face lit up with a joy that momentarily banished his fears. She ran to him and he swept her into his arms, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a shifting world. "You're safe," she whispered into his neck. "I am now," he murmured, breathing in the scent of her hair. But later, after the greetings and the shared meal, he told her what he had seen. The color drained from her face. "They are here? In Asia?" "I don't know if they were looking for us specifically," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "They were frumentarii on official business. But their presence means the machinery of the state is here. It means we can never be truly complacent." The carefree peace of their first weeks in Ephesus was over. The world had shrunk again. They were still fugitives. A few days later, Lucius was at the docks, inquiring about future work with Alexandros, when he felt a presence behind him. He turned slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward the dagger at his belt. It was the hawk-faced frumentarius from the road. "Lucius Vorenus," the man said, his voice a low conversational purr. "The Emperor and Senator Sabinus send their regards." Lucius's world narrowed to a single deadly point. He was unarmored, armed only with a dagger against what he assumed were multiple well-armed men. "My name is Marcus," the man continued, smiling thinly. "You've led us on a merry chase, from Rome to Corfinium to Brundisium, and now here. You are more resourceful than your file suggests." "What do you want?" Lucius growled. "The girl, of course, Cassia Falco. Her uncle is dead. He refused to confess to treason and was executed in the Tullianum. His property was forfeit. The case remains open until the last of his line is accounted for." Marcus took a step closer. "You are collateral. Sabinus is a thorough man. He doesn't like loose ends. You humiliated him." So Falco was dead. The news was a physical pain in Lucius's chest. The great man had fallen, just as he said he would, and they had come for Cassia to complete the eradication. "You will never touch her," Lucius said, his voice deathly calm. "Oh, I think we will," Marcus said. "We know you are here. We know you are with the purple cellar, Lydia. We have been watching. We will take her tonight. You can die now, pointlessly, or you can die later, after you watch. The choice is yours." Lucius knew this was not a negotiation. It was a declaration of intent. Marcus was telling him this to savor his despair, to make him run, to make the hunt more interesting. In that moment, every instinct, every dirty trick he had learned as a soldier and an informer, came to the forefront. He did not attack. He did not run. He let his shoulders slump, feigning defeat. "You win," he muttered, looking at the ground. "Just give me until sundown. Let me say goodbye. Then I will come to you. I'll tell you everything." Marcus laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Sentiment from an informer? How pathetic." "Very well, sundown. Be at the Temple of Isis by the harbor. Come alone. If you try to run, we will make her death last for days." He turned and walked away, melting into the crowd on the docks. Lucius stood frozen for a second, then he moved. He didn't go back to Lydia's house. He went to the one place he knew he could find the kind of help he needed. Not prayers, but steel. He found Alexandros at a tavern near the Agora, sharing a drink with two of his most reliable men, a hulking Thracian named Brixius and a wiry Cretan archer called Lycos. "Alexandros," Lucius said, his voice urgent, "I need your help, the kind that pays in gold and requires no questions." Alexandros took one look at his face and gestured for him to sit. "Talk." "Imperial agents are here to kill my wife," Lucius said, the word wife feeling more true than ever before. "They plan to take her tonight. I have until sundown to surrender myself. I plan to do the opposite." He laid out the bones of a plan. It was reckless, brutal, and depended on speed and surprise. He placed the remaining 2 gold aurei from Sabinus's pouch on the table. The coins glinted in the tavern's dim light. Alexandros looked at the gold, then at the grim determination on Lucius's face. He had fought beside this man. He trusted him. "The Thracian and I hate Romans who throw their weight around in Greek cities," Alexandros said, scooping up the coins. "Lycos enjoys moving in the shadows. Consider them hired. What is your plan?" Chapter 11. The Gift of Grace. Lucius burst into Lydia's house, his face a mask of controlled panic. "They're here! The frumentarii! We have to go! Now!" Cassia and Lydia looked up from their weaving, their faces frozen in shock. He didn't give them time to think. He grabbed their pre-packed emergency bags, a lesson learned from their flight from Rome, and hustled them out the back door, through the garden, and into the maze of narrow alleys behind the house. "Where are we going?" Cassia asked, her voice trembling. "To the docks. We're getting on a ship. Any ship." It was a feint, a performance for anyone who might be watching. He led them on a circuitous route, doubling back, always moving towards the warehouse district near the harbor where Alexandros had his base of operations. Meanwhile, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bloody hues, Marcus and his 2 fellow agents moved towards Lydia's house. They were confident, professional. This was a simple mop-up operation. They never reached the door. As they turned into a quiet, shadowed street leading to the house, a figure stepped out from a doorway. It was Lucius, his gladius in his hand. "You're early, Varenus," Marcus said, drawing his own sword. His 2 companions fanned out. "And foolish, I said come alone." "I am alone," Lucius said. That was the signal. There was a soft thwip sound from a rooftop above. One of the frumentarii grunted and collapsed, a Cretan arrow protruding from his throat. Before the other could react, the huge form of Brixius emerged from another alley, his massive two-handed axe cleaving through the man's shoulder with a sickening crunch. Marcus, his eyes, wide with shock and fury, lunged at Lucius. Their swords met in a shower of sparks. Marcus was good, fast and technical, but Lucius was fighting for more than his life. He was fighting for Cassia, for their future, for the redemption he had only just begun to taste. It was not a duel. It was a slaughter. Lucius fought with a brute, efficient fury born of the German frontier. He parried a thrust, slammed his shoulder into Marcus, and as the man staggered back, Lucius's gladius punched deep into his chest. Marcus looked down at the blade in disbelief, then up at Lucius. "Sabinus, we'll send others," he gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. "Let him," Lucius said, and twisted the blade. He stood panting over the three bodies in the gathering darkness. Alexandros and Brixius emerged from the shadows, while Lycos dropped silently from the roof. "It is done," Alexandros said. "The dock watch is paid to look the other way tonight. The bodies will be in the harbor before the moon is high." Lucius nodded, his body trembling with adrenaline and aftermath. "Thank you. You paid for a service," Alexandros said with a shrug. "We delivered. If you need work again, you know where to find us." They melted away, leaving Lucius alone with the dead. He quickly stripped Marcus of his official seal and any documents, then helped the others drag the bodies to the water's edge and consign them to the deep. The sea, which had almost taken them, now hid their secret. An hour later, he walked into the small, hidden chamber beneath Lydia's workshop where Cassia was waiting, pale and terrified. When she saw him, unharmed, she flew into his arms. "It's over," he whispered, holding her tightly. "They're gone. For now," Lydia said, her face grave. "But the Romans said others would come. You cannot stay here. The connection to my house is too great." Lucius nodded. He had already thought of this. He looked at Cassia. "We have to disappear, not just from Ephesus, but from the world the Romans know." He turned to Lydia. "Do you have contacts? Further east? Syria, perhaps? Or even further?" Lydia thought for a moment. "There is a man, a trader in Antioch. He supplies our community here. He is a believer, and he has caravans that go to Edessa and even beyond to Parthia. It is a hard life on the very edge of the empire." "The edge is what we need," Lucius said. He looked at Cassia. "It is your choice. We can run forever, it seems, or we can stop here and fight a war we cannot win." Cassia looked from Lydia's worried face to Lucius's resolute one. She thought of her uncle, dying for a principle in a Roman dungeon. She thought of the 3 gold coins that had started it all. She thought of the storm at sea and the peace she had felt in Lucius's arms afterwards. She took his hand. "My home is not a place," she said softly. "It is with you. Where you go, I will go." 2 weeks later, they stood on the deck of a different ship, a smaller, coast-hugging vessel heading for the great metropolis of Antioch. Ephesus, with its marble glory and its hidden dangers, was receding behind them. Lucius put his arm around Cassia, pulling her close against the chill wind. The 3 gold coins were gone, spent on blood, passage, and a new beginning. The ashes of his old life had finally settled. He was no longer Lucius the soldier, the magistrate, the informer, or the fugitive. He was simply Lucius, a man loved by a woman of extraordinary faith. He had not found her God in the scriptures or the sermons, but he had found something of his grace in her eyes, in her forgiveness, in her unwavering love. It was a gift he had not earned, but one he would spend the rest of his life striving to be worthy of. As the ship sailed into the rising sun towards the unknown frontiers of the east, he knew the running was over. They were not fleeing anymore. They were journeying together towards a future they would build with their own hands, far from the shadow of the eagle, under the vast, forgiving sky.